Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a really important law that affects pretty much every workplace in India, the POSH Act. Whether you're an employee, a manager, or a business owner, you need to know how this works, because it's all about building a workplace that isn't just productive, but is genuinely safe and respectful for everyone.
Okay, before we dive into all the details, let's start with the single most important idea in this entire law. It's a principle that completely changes the game when it comes to workplace harassment, and it's this. The law cares about the impact of your actions, not what you intended. Just let that sink in for a second. It's the key to understanding everything else we're going to talk about.
You know, a law like this doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's built on a clear legal history, all aimed at making our workplaces safer. It really kicked off back in 1997 with the landmark Vishaka Guidelines. Then, in 2013, it became solid law with the POSH Act. And looking ahead, its core ideas are set to be strengthened even more. So here's how we're going to break it all down today. First, we'll dig into that core legal standard we just touched on. Then, we'll walk through the 5 specific types of harassment the law calls out. After that, we'll look at the 2 main ways this behavior gets classified. We'll also see how this all applies to the modern workplace, with remote work and all that. And finally, we'll talk about the most important part, how we actually prevent this stuff from happening in the first place.
All right, let's really get into that core legal standard. The whole thing, the idea that changes everything, really just boils down to one simple but incredibly powerful word: unwelcome.
And this is a huge shift in legal thinking. All those old excuses like, oh, I was just joking, or I didn't mean any harm by it, well, they're just not relevant anymore. The law's focus is now 100% on the person on the receiving end, and the only question that matters is, was the conduct unwelcome to them?
This right here is the legal foundation for the whole act. It says that unwelcome behavior can be direct and obvious, or it can even be implied and subtle. The bottom line is really simple. If the person who experienced it didn't want it, it can be considered harassment. Period.
So, with that big idea of unwelcome conduct in mind, let's look at the specific behaviors the law explicitly calls out as sexual harassment. The law lays out 5 clear categories. You've got unwelcome physical contact and advances. Then there's any demand or request for sexual favors. Of course, sexually colored remarks are on the list, along with showing pornography. But that 5th one, other unwelcome conduct, that one is a real game changer. It's a catch-all that's crucial for covering all the other stuff, the subtle but really damaging behaviors, like stalking, leering, or just repeatedly asking someone out when they've already said no. Okay, so we have those 5 types of harassment. Now let's look at 2 big picture ways to understand how these behaviors actually play out in a workplace. These aren't new types of harassment, but more like frameworks to help classify what's going on.
So what's the difference? Well, quid pro quo is basically Latin for this for that. It's when someone in power says, or even just implies, do this for me and you'll get that promotion. Or if you don't do this, you're fired. It's a direct threat. A hostile work environment is different. It's not about one single trade-off. It's when the overall atmosphere becomes intimidating, offensive, or just toxic because of repeated unwelcome behavior. Think constant lewd jokes or inappropriate comments from coworkers. And here's a key point. Anyone can contribute to creating a hostile environment, not just someone in a position of power.
Right, but what about the world we work in today? I mean, things have changed, right? We've got remote work, endless chat messages, so how does the law keep up? Well, it has to adapt.
The principles of the POSH Act extend way beyond the 4 walls of an office. That means it absolutely covers virtual harassment, inappropriate messages on Slack, emails, comments on a video call, you name it. It also covers harassment from people who don't even work at the company, like a client or a vendor. And get this, the employer can still be held responsible for not protecting their employee in that situation. And finally, the law recognizes something called intersectional harassment, which is when sexual harassment gets tangled up with other forms of discrimination, like those based on caste or religion. Now, this next point, coming straight from the Indian courts, is absolutely crucial. We often think of harassment as something that has to be a repeated pattern over time, but the courts have made it crystal clear that's not always the case. One single severe incident can be more than enough to violate the law and create a hostile environment.
Okay, so understanding the law is step 1. It's the baseline. But the real goal here isn't just to follow the rules. It's to create a culture where harassment just doesn't happen to begin with. This is about moving beyond simply ticking boxes on a compliance form to making a real, meaningful cultural change. And let's be honest, the stakes are incredibly high. For the person going through it, harassment can cause deep psychological trauma and completely derail their career. And for the organization, the fallout isn't just about legal fines. It's about massive damage to your reputation, a total collapse in employee morale, and a serious hit to your bottom line. A toxic culture is just plain bad for business.
So how do you build that safe culture? It really comes down to 3 core pillars that all work together. First, you need education. Everyone has to know what harassment actually is and why it's unacceptable. Second, you need empathy, a genuine effort to understand and respect the experiences of your colleagues. And finally, you need accountability. That means a rock-solid commitment to investigating issues fairly and taking appropriate action when necessary.
So, we'll leave you with this question to think about. Because while the law gives us the framework, the actual work of building an environment where every single person feels safe, dignified, and respected, well, that responsibility belongs to all of us.